So this is my third time reading Hyperion by Dan Simmons. The last time I read it was 9 years ago, so it's been quite a while. The first time I read it, I don't think I even finished it. I remember hating it and just loathing it. I reread it a second time and I quite liked it. But third time, 9 years later, I really liked it. I thought it was fantastic. I haven't read any of the others in the series, but I'm going to have to get the second one, at least, just to see where the story goes. So this is The Canterbury Tales in Space. The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer is, I think, 14th century Middle English. The story of these pilgrims traveling on a pilgrimage, and to fill the time, each of the different people on this pilgrimage tell their story, and they all come from different walks of life, so they all have different perspectives on the world and tell these different stories. And that's precisely what this book is. It's a group of people, 7 people. Technically, I mean, it gets complicated. We'll say 7. 7 people that are going on a pilgrimage to this planet, because it's a sci-fi, and they're going to meet this sort of deity being thing and ask of it a wish. And on this pilgrimage, it's expected that one person gets their wish fulfilled and the other 6 die. It's pretty morbid. It's a dark book. And so much like Canterbury Tales, they set off and one of them says, hey, let's each tell our story of why we're going on this pilgrimage, and maybe that can help give us enough information to sort of figure this whole mystery out of the Shrike, this deity that they're going to meet on the planet Hyperion, because there's lots of mystery involved and they feel like having as much information as possible will help them in some way. And so they get to Hyperion at a time when the Shrike has been sort of let loose. It had been contained in a certain area of the planet, but for whatever reason it now seems to be everywhere. And so there's a mass exodus. Everyone is trying to flee this planet, and they're the only ones who are not. And so they're heading towards the sort of traditional Shrike pilgrimage, but the Church of the Shrike, which organizes this pilgrimage and runs this big religious organization, has been under attack because of all the things that the Shrike has been doing. So they've been wiped out, and these people are kind of on their own after a while. They land on the planet and make their way further and further away from the cities and get to, finally, at the end of the book, they don't actually meet the Shrike, but they sort of end at the end of their pilgrimage, arriving at the place where they are to meet the Shrike. And it's really strange. The final pages of the book, the pilgrims all link hands and sing that they're off to see the wonderful Wizard of Oz, in sort of a silly, goofy way. It's not really a silly, goofy book, but I don't know, that was such a strange, striking image to me, these people singing that song. But the main part of the book is the 6 stories that these characters tell. So only 6, because the 7th, this guy Het Mastine, who's a captain of these world ships, these world trees, I should say, which are ships, world tree ships. I don't know. The ship is called Yggdrasil, so I don't necessarily think they're based on Norse mythology, but this faction is very, again, we don't see his perspective, so we don't really learn much about them, but from the bits and pieces you can pick up, they seem to be very environmentalists, very conservationists. He has brought with him this being that lives off force fields, creature thing locked in stasis. That's his plan, is to let that out, and it will help them deal with the Shrike, because the Shrike can manipulate time, and so is sort of outside of time. That's why it's so deadly. The Shrike itself is this four-limbed. It's got 4 arms, I guess a 6-limbed humanoid thing at 8 or 9 feet tall, made of a mass of spikes, and is shiny and chrome and quicksilver-like, and has these red glowing eyes, and is known as the Lord of Pain by the Shrike Church, and seems to be just this evil creature that is just bent on death and destruction and just kills everything. So that's why Het Mastine, this starship captain of these Templars, they're called the Templars, which evokes a sort of a holy crusade, I guess. That's how he plans to deal with the Shrike. That's his goal, as far as we know. We don't get his perspective, because at one point in the book it seems like he's died, he's disappeared from the rest of the pilgrims, and there's just blood everywhere, so they assume, the Shrike got him, he's the first victim. But then later on they see a figure in the distance heading in the direction that they're heading, and they assume, because of the height of it must be Het Mastine, who somehow survived and is carrying on. So maybe we find out in the second book, but we don't know what happens to him. But the other 6 tell their stories, and it's really neat, because the way all of their stories are so different almost genres and different themes and tones, and they're all set in this world, and it's such a neat way to show world building. It's not to have the ignorant farmer boy who just finds out he's the chosen one and has to go out to the wide world and we see everything through his eyes. No, we are in this world and we see sections of it, facets of it, through the eyes and the stories of these 6 very different individuals, and the reader can draw connections between them and sort of create this 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional image, including the history of this world, this universe, and I think it's fantastically done. One thing I didn't really like, though, like at the start when all of the pilgrims have arrived in Hyperion and they're about to start their pilgrimage, the poet Martin Silenus, he says, "Hey, let's all tell stories," and I thought, oh, it's Canterbury Tales, so cool. But right before the first story starts, the poet literally quotes the opening lines, or not the opening lines, but quotes part of the prologue from the Canterbury Tales in the original Middle English. I felt like that was too sort of on the nose. Like even the in-world characters are aware that they are sort of recreating the Canterbury Tales. I thought that was a bit much. Didn't think we needed that. But this book is full of literary references and allusions. Many I'm sure I didn't pick up on. But the book itself is called Hyperion. The sort of capital city of the planet Hyperion is Keats, named after, of course, John Keats, the poet who plays a huge role in this. I feel like it's not fan fiction, but this is like Dan Simmons' love letter to John Keats. He adores this guy. And I actually went and read the poem. So John Keats had wrote a poem called Hyperion, a fragment. He never actually finished it. And then he tried again and wrote the Fall of Hyperion, a vision or a dream. And again, it's just a fragment. But I went and read those, and they are about the sort of Titanomachy, the war of the Greek gods against the Titans, the Zeus and his ilk overthrowing their forefathers, their parents, and taking their place in the sort of Olympic pantheon. And I quite liked especially just the poem fragment Hyperion. It's through the perspective of the Titans, and you're sort of on the side of the Titans, and they have fallen, and they're dejected, and some of them have accepted that these new gods have taken over, but then there's Hyperion, the god of the sun, who's still in his sort of glory and has not been overthrown yet, and he's kind of like seemingly going to lead the charge to fight back against these Olympians. Anyways, that's the John Keats poem that is named Hyperion. But this book itself, John Keats has a huge role, which we'll see. So the first story is The Priest's Tale, which to me is the most iconic. It's the one that stands out the most, probably my favorite one. In it, we hear from Leonard Hoyt, this Catholic priest who tells the story of his sort of mentor, Paul Dure, who had gone to Hyperion in sort of exile. Again, Catholic priest who tried to revitalize the religion because Catholicism, Christianity is on the downturn, because we find out that Earth has been destroyed. Old Earth, planet Earth, has been consumed by a black hole and was destroyed. And in that destruction, they had the Hegira, which is an Arabic term, I believe, for sort of not an exile, but an emigration, a fleeing of some dangerous event. And so they refer to pre-Hegira times or post-Hegira or the Hegira. And yeah, so humanity spread it to the stars and Earth is gone. And of course, if Earth is gone, and God swore never to flood or destroy the Earth again, well, he broke his promise, so Christianity's not doing so hot. So this guy, Paul Dure, had sort of faked an archaeological dig in where he found Christian symbols or stuff that implies that Christianity had existed even before Christ on Earth, but it wasn't real. And because of this, he's sort of self-exiles to Hyperion. He's going to go and find these indigenous group that's really cut off and be a sort of an ethnographer and just hang out with them for decades. But to get to them, they have to go through this forest that like catches on fire for a certain period of the year because of electricity and bioelectricity or whatever. This forest ignites, and these things called Tesla trees and whatever. It just means this place is really cut off. So if he gets there, he's stuck there for a bit. So he gets there, he finds the indigenous population, and they're very strange. They refer to themselves as the 210. There's only 70 of them. They look all sort of uniform, and he can kind of make out differences between them, but determining gender is really hard. And they speak, but they speak in this like old Earth dialect because they're sort of the remnants of this crashed colony ship that only had 70 people on it. And it's kind of weird that there's still 70 of them, and they all seem to be the same age. And this mystery is unfolding. They're next to this huge ravine, this sort of great Grand Canyon times 10, and they go down at night and come up, and they won't let him go down. They ask him if he is of the cross, or does he follow the cross or the cruciform, and he's like, yeah, actually I am. I'm a Catholic priest. I follow the cruciform or whatever. And they're cool with that. They had murdered his guide, which I was getting like Heart of Darkness vibes from the start of this journey into the jungle, but they murdered the guide because he was not of the cruciform, and Paul Dure has no idea what this means. He eventually, when the 210 are out in the forest foraging for food, he goes down and tries to find out what they've been looking at, and he comes across this ancient alien cathedral with like stained glass, looking like a very Catholic basilica. And like, he did not expect to see this here. This is crazy. And if that's not enough, he enters, and at the center is this cross, a huge cross made out of like gems and glittering and whatnot. And the way the sun would set at a certain time of day, it would have this glow. And he's sort of, this is sort of his eye-opening moment. Like, he had faked this evidence, but here's the real evidence that Christianity has existed for millennia, perhaps millions of years in this, on this planet. And like, what does it mean? Who built this? All this really cool, like, ancient alien lore stuff that I love in sci-fi. But the problem starts when now none of the 210 will allow him to examine them naked, and he assumes this is a cultural thing. Why does he want to look at them naked? Well, he's an ethnographer. He wants to get to know them. He was wondering why they're always covered up. But at one point he's bathing, and one of them catches him and is totally shocked, runs back, gets the others. They'll come and grab him and are able to kill him. And he's shocked. He's like, why do you want to kill me? What the heck? And they're like, you're not of the cruciform. And he's like, I totally am. Check out my cross. He's got like his crucifix. I'm a Catholic. And they have a big debate, and they eventually agree that they're going to have to take him down and actually make him of the cruciform. And he's like, what does this mean? So they take him to the bottom of the ravine, past this basilica thing. And the ravine cuts through one of these labyrinthian caves, which is another mystery in this universe, is that certain planets are labyrinthine. They have these huge subterranean tunnels that crisscross and maze throughout the entire planet, and there's only a certain amount of planets. Hyperion is one of them. What is the purpose of these? Who knows? But they enter into this labyrinth, and they don't get very far in it, and there's these sort of organisms along the wall that are shaped like cruciforms. And they pry one off, about 16 inches long or whatever, tie a rope around it, put it around his neck. And they're like, okay, you are now of the cruciform. He's like, sure, thanks, whatever. And he climbs all the way back up. And the next morning he finds that this cruciform has embedded itself into his chest. He can't get it off. And he tries cutting it off, and that causes problems and pain. And he's now, because he is of the cross, the others will let him examine them, and he sees that they all have these cruciforms, and also that they're all sort of genderless. They have no sexual organs. They've always, he referred to them at the start as sort of like childlike, or their mental capacity is very limited. He referred to like sort of Down syndrome similarities. And anyways, it gets stranger when one of these people actually dies, and he's shocked, and he takes the corpse to them and he starts to bury it, and they're like, whoa, don't bury the corpse. What are you doing? They take the corpse down to the basilica with the giant cross, put it on an altar, and he watches as the corpse reanimates itself, or more specifically, the cruciform on the corpse. As he studied them, it has its tendrils throughout the entire body and up into the nervous system of the person. The cruciform reanimates the corpse, and the person comes back to life. And this happens again and again, and he realizes that these people are immortal. These are the original inhabitants, the original colonists, who have, because of this symbiotic relationship with this cruciform, have lived all this time. And because of their deaths and brain damage and whatnot, each time they're resuscitated, they sort of lose a bit of their humanity, and they become this sort of drones that they are now. And in fact, one person gets killed, but they're too far away for anyone to notice. By the time they get to them, the body has been stripped by ants, I think it is, or some insects, and there's nothing left but bones in the crucifix. And so they take the crucifix, and someone else puts it on their back, and by like mitosis, eventually the cruciform will gain enough nutrients from the host body that it will somehow split in two, and then there will be these two people again. And so that starts Paul Dure's mission to sort of somehow get this thing off of him. And he's tried cutting it, but the pain gets too much, and it sort of knocks him out. We get all of this through his journals, by the way. He's been writing journals that Leonard Hoyt then finds when he went and tried to find Paul Dure. And he discovers that as he tries to leave this sort of area where the crucifix is, he experiences pain to the point where he has to come back. So he's sort of locked to this one place. The organism, the cruciform, will not let him leave. But through sheer strength of will, he managed to crawl into the fire forest, and that's where Leonard Hoyt found him nailed to a cross. He crucified himself, and it's in the midst of this forest that catches on fire and incinerates everything. And so this man, Paul Dure, has been incinerated on this cross over and over and over again, and the cruciform keeps resuscitating him. So he's like experiencing extreme pain, like being boiled and burned alive over and over and over again. And when Leonard Hoyt finds him, like years later, he's still on there and he's still alive. But at that moment, he finally wins, and he dies the true death, the cruciform falls off him and he is no more. And that's the end of the priest's tale. But what Leonard Hoyt is hiding from the rest of the pilgrims is that he had actually taken this cruciform of Paul Duret's, put it on his back, took one and put it on himself. So he had become one of the cross, a follower of the cruciform. And so in doing so, trying to bring Paul Duret back. But all I can see it is how he's undermined the heroic, self-sacrificing, the most like strong-willed act that a human has ever done, to sort of burn himself to death for years at a time, until like experience a living hell, literally, until he sort of overcomes this cruciform. And that's been wiped out now that Leonard Hoyt's put the one on the back and is trying to bring back Paul Duret. So Leonard Hoyt, that's our priest. He also sort of, not the soul of, but some part of Paul Duret is also on this expedition in the cruciform on his back. Next, we have the soldier's story, which is quite a bit different. It's more of a sci-fi sort of military versus the last one, which is kind of like a horror story. About this guy, Fedman Kassad, who is a very famous military guy. He's known as the Butcher of Brevia. He rose through the ranks very quickly. He came from the streets and was like in a violent gang, but through a series of circumstances and his excellence in the military, he rose quite quickly and became a captain. They talk about this Bushido or Bushdo that the worlds hold to, the hegemony, which is sort of the universal government. Not all the worlds are hegemony worlds, but hegemony is slowly like it's kind of a democratic empire, technocratic empire. They're slowly taking worlds in, or worlds submit to them willingly. It's kind of a commonwealth. But anyways, they hold to this idea of Bushido, the sort of an honor system in war, where there's no more total war, because history has taught us that this is not good. By the way, this is in like the 28th century this book takes place. And so wars sort of have rules, sort of semi-strict rules, and civilians aren't targeted and whatnot. But anyways, he comes up against this one battle with this faction known as the Ousters, who are one of the only large groups of human civilization that's outside of the hegemony. They are a spacefaring race. It's described that they're the only ones that have really evolved, whereas the hegemony has sort of held to traditional cultural, societal rules and biological norms from old Earth. But the Ousters have moved beyond. They live in space. And so there's this one battle, and the Ousters aren't playing by the rules. They are being ruthless on this one planet, which is not even a hegemony planet. And the generals don't know what to do. They've never seen anything like this, and they're just being slaughtered. But Kassad, because he grew up on the mean streets, he knows this stuff, and he sort of takes command and leads them to a very, very bloody victory. So he's called the Butcher of Brevia. This happened on Brevia, which is like a sort of a Prussian planet. I love the sort of continuations between past and present. This book really does a good job of, like, Brevia has a place called Buckminster, which is like a Buckingham Palace in Westminster, Buckminster, and like also the connections, or the disconnections as well. So like in the priest's story, or on Hyperion, there's an archipelago called the Cat of Nine Tails, and he's like, I can't think of any mythology that has a cat that has 9 tails. When it's like, well, the Cat of Nine Tails is the whip that like it's a biblical reference, but in being a Catholic, he doesn't understand this biblical reference because so many centuries have passed that's just been lost. Another one is on the planet Hyperion, everything's named after a literary figure, right? But there's this one bar called Cicero's, and everyone's like, yeah, but this one bar at Cicero's, we think it's named after the American city Chicago, because we don't see a connection to literature in Cicero. So things like that have been lost, but also the continuations, the Catholic religion somehow continuing. And in Kassad's case, he's a Palestinian, so it describes how the Palestinian cause is still to this day, or to them in this far-flung future, there's still sort of a homeless diaspora. But Kassad, the weird thing with Kassad, he's been plugged into these simulations during his training, and they simulate old wars and past battles. So he's like at the Battle of Agincourt, and he's a bowman, an English bowman in the Battle of Agincourt, or a Welsh bowman. And after the battle, this woman comes to him, and they have sex, and there's lots of sex in this section. It's a very male centered, but like, this is I don't want to say it's a man's book, but it's very much written by a man, written for men, written with the perspective of men. There's very little women in this book. There's one woman's story, which we'll get to, but even that story is like a weird sort of, I don't want to say it's a fetish of someone who loves John Keats, but this woman like ends up sleeping with John Keats, which becomes John Keats' lover, which I don't know what Simmons' deal is with Keats. But anyways, this woman shows up in Kassad's sort of simulations, and Is she real? Well, yes, she seems to be real, but he never meets her outside of the simulations. Then she starts showing up in his dreams, but it's not. It's more than dreams. It's sort of a waking dream or a lucid dream, and each time they have sex in the midst of blood and gore and death and war. And he eventually finds out her name's Moneta, which is the name of one of the characters in the John Keats poem Fall of Hyperion, I think it is, which is like another name for memory, Mnemosyne. But anyways, he keeps meeting this girl, and he's like so in love with her. And eventually, at the end of his tale, he's in orbit over Hyperion, and his ship's attacked by ousters. And so this really cool like space battle where he's crawls into the suit of a dead marine, and he uses the suit's kind of broken. He rigs traps for the ousters. He fights a bunch off, and then he steals their ship and crash lands on the planet. And when he comes to, Moneta is there. She gives him this suit, which like coats his body in sort of this quicksilver, and with this suit he can control time, much like the Shrike. And the Shrike actually shows up himself. Moneta calls him the Lord of Pain. And the three of them go out and fight the ousters. And because a few of the ousters have landed to try and hunt down Cassad. And they just annihilate them. Brutally, viciously cut them all to pieces. Because he can control time. He can slow time down so that he can sort of get around, dodge lasers even, and stuff like that. And the climax of this story is when, of course, after this bloody battle, he's having intense sex with Moneta, who then sort of transforms herself into the Shrike. And that like scares the crap out of him, of course, and he ends up passes out. He wakes up, he's been rescued. And now he's on this pilgrimage, and they're like, what are you going to ask of the Shrike? And he's like, I'm not going to ask anything, I'm going to kill it. So Cassad, he's out for revenge. He's out to kill this beast. Then we have the poet's story, which this guy, Martin Salinas, he's a character. He's drinking all the time, he's cursing and swearing, he's very old, but he doesn't look it because he's had lots of anti-aging treatments and whatnot. But he tells his story eventually, and he's a bit of a quite lustful. What's the word? He's like a womanizer, but not really a womanizer because everyone kind of hates him, and he's really annoying, and the group can't stand him. But anyways, he reveals that he had been born on Old Earth. He was the ultimate Nepo baby. He was born to a super aristocratic family. He said that North America was his playground, and he could do all this stuff, and he had been taught poetry and raised as a super rich boy. And when the earth had been destroyed by this black hole, his mother invested a lot of money and sent him on a ship away, and she stayed to die like a bunch of the aristocrats did because they're bound to Old Earth or some sort of ridiculous reason. Anyways, he wakes up a few hundred years later because of the time dilation of traveling in the ship, and wakes up in the hegemony essentially. And because of the hibernation thing on the ship wasn't that advanced, he has like a stroke, and so his brain's like half working, and he ends up being a manual laborer in this middle of nowhere planet in like miserable conditions. And he eventually finds his poetry again, and he sort of heals himself, and this woman sort of picks him up out of the mud and helps him out, finds his poetry's amazing, ends up marrying him, and he becomes sort of this world superstar and makes a lot of money with his book that he tells about Old Earth, because nostalgia people have been looking for something like this. And so he's super wealthy. He's got this really cool house where each part of the house is on a different planet, because they have these things called farcasters, which are kind of like not teleporters, but kind of ripping a hole in space and time, and you can be in one planet on one room and then step through this Farcaster portal into your next room and you're on a totally other planet. So he's living like the 1% in this galactic civilization. It's not galaxy wide, but in this interstellar civilization. But he's a poet and he wants to write actual poetry, and he does, but no one buys it because people don't appreciate fine art. And so he starts writing like cheap romance novels or cheap adventure novels, and that sort of keeps him going until he's finally fed up. And he flees with this guy called Sad King Billy, or William I forget what it is, William the Sixth or something, who's essentially the sort of the remains of the British monarchy. And this guy, Sad King Billy, is taking a whole bunch of artists and poets and creators and is going to go to Hyperion and settle it, because there has been some indigenous people there, but it isn't really, it's like a backwards world with not much there. And so all these artists are going to flee and go to this place. They're fleeing the planet of Asquith, by the way, which is weird that the planet's named after the that one British prime minister that like nobody even knows anymore. But so they get to Hyperion and found this city called the City of Poets, and they found Keats, and everything seems to be going well. Martin Silenus, this poet, he transforms himself into a satyr and goes around sleeping with everyone on the planet. Doesn't really do much writing, but then he starts researching this thing called the Shrike mythology, which it's just a myth. The people of the planet have this idea of this thing called the Shrike. He starts looking into it, and it becomes his muse, and he starts writing again and writing this really long cantos, the Hyperion cantos, about this being the Shrike. And as he's writing it, the Shrike is now turning up and is actually murdering people. People are being murdered all over the place. At first, they don't know what's going on, but then they determine that it's this thing, the Shrike. And so they eventually have to abandon the City of Poets because it's within sort of the Shrike's habitat. But Martin Silenus, he sort of comes to the realization that it's weird. It's almost as if he's the Shrike's originator, in that writing this poetry, he's bringing the Shrike to life. And Sad King Billy comes to this conclusion as well, and tries to destroy the poem. And he thinks that if he can burn it, then the Shrike will disappear. But as he's trying to do that, the Shrike stabs and kills King Billy and leaves Martin Silenus alone. And so that's the poet. He plans to go to see the Shrike to sort of finish his work, or to, I'm not really sure why. Another thing we haven't really mentioned yet is the time tombs. So also on Hyperion, because the Shrike's involved in time, there are these alien structures that have been built that are going actually backwards through time. They're surrounded by these entropic fields where time goes in reverse, and all of these time tombs are empty, but because they're going backwards in time, sometime in the future they're going to be full and have been opened. So they're already opened now and they're empty, but in the future, because they're going backwards in time, someone will have put something in them which will be unleashed. And it's sort of this belief that in the future, humanity created these things, filled them full of stuff, sent them back in time so that they would open at some point and something would happen. And the Shrike is like a guardian of this thing, or maybe was in the time tombs and has been released. We're not really sure. But yeah, Martin Silenus, he stayed sort of in the City of Poets as sort of the ghost, and the Shrike didn't touch him. Sort of let him have free reign. I love the intro to this section. It says, in the beginning was the Word, so capital W, a reference to the Gospel of John. And it says, then came the word processor, then came the thought processor, then the death of literature, and so it goes. Which I don't think that "so it goes" is a Slaughterhouse-5 reference, but it put me in that sort of mindset. But I love that in the beginning was the Word, then came the word processor, and then came the thought processor, which in this world is something that you think something and it will just automatically type it. But I like to think of, instead of thought processors, you can fit sort of AI, LLMs in for that. And then came the death of literature, so it goes. But this section was also really cool because of this sort of the philosophy of the written word, and how there exists the mechanical universe and then the universe of language, and how language shapes thought, and how by expanding language we can expand thought. By expanding thought we can then expand language, and how language in the written word, the word, capital W, it's something so unique in the universe, and something so unexplainable, something so precious and beautiful and powerful. But anyways, that's the poet's tale. Then we have the scholar's tale. So this is about this guy Sol Weintraub, who's known as the Wandering Jew. So he has never actually been to Hyperion. And this story, again, takes a very different turn. It's a very tragic tale. It made me feel very emotional. And I imagine if you're a parent, it will really affect you as well. This guy Sol, he had this daughter, Rachel. He got married, he had this daughter, Rachel. Rachel grew up to be an archaeologist, and she ended up going on a trip to Hyperion. She was investigating the time tombs, and one time when she was alone inside of this place, something happened, and it seems like the Shrike appeared or intervened, and the entropic fields went crazy. Something happened, and when she comes to, they've determined that her body, much like the time tombs, is now traveling backwards in time. And so she comes back to her family, and the rest of the story becomes Sol sort of traveling around the worlds trying to find a cure for her. And she's getting younger each and every day. Every day she wakes up, she has no memory of the day before, and she's physically a year younger, and also mentally. All her memories are being erased one day at a time. And so what's more tragic than slowly losing one of your child to an illness is watching that child regress from year to year and lose themselves, lose their memories, their experiences, and the child having that disconnect of waking up every morning and having no idea where they are, and thinking it's a different year and something different's going to happen. And it was a really tough, just an incredibly dark situation. And much like the Catholicism part, so the Jews are sort of a diaspora ad infinitum. They're never going to be able to go to the back to the promised land because of course Earth has been destroyed. And so Judaism's kind of much different than it is now, but Soul kind of finds his religion or his culture and reconnects with it. But he also keeps having these dreams where an entity, a being, sort of a god, is asking him to go to the planet Hyperion and sacrifice or offer his daughter as a burnt offering, in the exact same way that in the Torah, God asks Abraham to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice, which Abraham does. And when he's about to sort of kill Isaac, God stays his hand and says, it was a test. I guess you're obedient. You'll even sacrifice your son. Just testing you. You're good to go. And Soul, experiencing this, is like, no, I'm not going to sacrifice my daughter. And he has sort of a crisis of belief in that his whole religion is based on obedience, blind obedience, and he's got problems with that. But it's revealed that his wife, now this is why I say this is like a man's novel, his wife is going through the same thing as he is, but we never really see the wife's perspective or her thoughts on it. She talks very briefly about it, but it's weird. It's weird how left out of the story she is. But she reveals she's having similar dreams, and he goes to the cult of the Shrike, and they want nothing to do with him as well. They sort of say his daughter's blessed, and then when he talks about the dream, which it seems to be the Shrike's the one that's asking him to sacrifice his daughter, they finally agree to let him go on a trip to Hyperion. So that's how he becomes one of these pilgrims. And at this time, his daughter is like weeks old. She's just almost a newborn because she's gone back in time. This has been 30 years since the incident in the time tombs. I did forget to mention, so in the soldier story, he also has a vision here. He sees the Shrike's thorn tree, or I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically this tree with lots of thorns and spikes on it that the Shrike impales its victims on, or its victims' souls, it's even described. And Assad reveals that he had seen in this vision some of the pilgrims. He doesn't say which ones that have been impaled on this tree. And that's a reference to the actual bird, the Shrike, which is a crazy little bird that will actually impale its prey on thorns, on like a thorn bush, and then like use that to eat them, hold them in place, kill them and eat them. Our next story is The Detective's Tale, which is kind of like a cyberpunk, sort of Gibsonian, which the word Gibsonian is actually used in this novel, which I think Neuromancer came out in the mid-80s. I think it was right after Blade Runner, the film. And this book was written or published in 1989, so not long after that. But it's very much like high-tech low life. It's this detective. It's kind of not really a noir, but it's this detective who like has connections with the underworld. And then there's the hacker guy where they have to go into I don't know what you call it, the matrix, the dreamscape, the internet, the web, the net, and hack some stuff. And so it has elements of those things in it. But in this story, because this is the one by a woman, Braun Lamia. Her name's Braun. She comes from this planet with a 1.3 G gravity, so she's like brawny. She's approached by this man who's described as just beautiful, this beautiful, elegant man who's, he said, oh, call me Johnny. And it's revealed that Johnny's a cybrid, which is like a hybrid of a human and a cyborg. So he is an AI. He is part of this thing called the Techno Core, which is this faction of sort of AIs. So humanity had created AIs, and then AIs became so powerful that they eventually seceded from humanity and formed their own sort of society called the Techno Core. But they still maintain connections with humanity and actually help them out. A lot of the internet and politics and everything is advised by and in a way controlled by the Technocore in sort of a seemingly benevolent or at least neutral fashion. And they have these sort of ambassadors, but 1,000 of them in these cybrid bodies, and this Johnny is one of them. Johnny is coming to Lamia because he needs her to investigate a murder, his murder. So he has been murdered, and he doesn't know why. And of course, because he's an AI cybrid, he was able to come back to life and sort of recreate his body and download the backup of his memory into it or whatever. But he did lose a period of time and lost a lot of memories. And because of that, that's like, to an AI, that's a millennia of time that he's lost, and to him it is just like a death. And to make it even weirder, this cybrid Johnny is John Keats. He has been based on, his personality has been based on all of the information they could gather from the original poet John Keats. And in fact, it's revealed that there's this planet that the Technocore has created that is like a physical recreation of old Earth in different times. And they have certain AIs that run certain programs to simulate. They have like this simulation of old Earth. That's where John Keats, Johnny, this hybrid, has been raised, and that's how he became this John Keats. And like I said, it's the weird Dan Simmons like obsession with John Keats, where he's described as being so beautiful, and he sleeps with Lamia, and they have sex so many times, and they're so in love. Anyways, throughout this story, we sort of get the full picture of this sort of overarching system where the factions, the hegemony, the Technocore, and the ousters are sort of these three players in this game for dominance. And it turns out the AIs are not so benevolent, not even so neutral. The AIs themselves are split into factions that their goal is to create this ultimate intelligence, UI, where they can predict everything, sort of understand all of the variables in the universe and predict how everything is going to go. But on Hyperion, the Shrike and the Time Tombs are enough of an uncertainty because of the weird time thing that they're only at 98% prediction capability. So they're really worried about the Shrike. Now, there is one faction that wants to wipe out all of humanity and says, we don't need humanity at all. Let's just eradicate them. They're going to cause a problem in the future and create this Shrike, which is going to somehow get at us. And there's other factions that are like, no, let's wait and see how things turn out. But it seems like this faction that's going to wipe out humanity is gaining power. And the hegemony itself, the sort of the head leader, which is not a president or a king or an emperor, it's a CEO. The CEO is sort of aware of this, and so they sort of, this whole war with Brescia and the ousters has all been a setup to sort of provoke hegemony into accepting Hyperion into the net. So building a Farcaster station around Hyperion so that people can go there automatically, which will of course risk releasing the Shrike into the whole web, which could potentially be the way that the AI plans to wipe everyone out. Or it seems to be believed that the ousters are the one who created the Shrike, and it's going to be the one to destroy the Technocore and protect humanity. I don't know. This is just the first book and we don't have enough answers. But it seems like that's why Johnny Keats was killed, was that he could lose this memory of going to Hyperion because he really wants to go to Hyperion because like of all the connections to the original poet John Keats. And so through a bunch of like space battles and underground alleyway fights and whatnot, they almost make it to the Church of the Shrike, which is like a neutral party where if they could have got to them, then they would have been shipped off to Hyperion and no one could stop it. But Johnny gets killed before he can get there. And he actually dies because he had sort of contained all of his AI-ness inside this one body because he wanted to sort of be as human as possible because he wanted to be John Keats. But as he's dying, he sort of had installed this microchip into Lamia's body that he transfers his consciousness into. And so Johnny Keats is inside of Lamia. So we've got the priests, who's also got Paul Dure, the other priest with him. We've got Sol Weintraub and his daughter. We've got Braun Lamia, who's also has this John Keats inside of her. We've got Colonel Kassad, who's maybe has this weird version of this girl inside of his head, who's actually the Shrike, or maybe not, who knows. But it seems like all of them are bringing something additional to the party, as it were. The poet himself is bringing, Martin Salinas, he's bringing his written Hyperion Cantos, which seems to be sort of the thing that maybe created the Shrike or something. Anyway, we then get to the final story, which is the Consul story. So the Consul is our POV. He's the one that we see through the eyes of at the start of the book. And he had been the sort of head of the consulate, the hegemony consulate on Hyperion for a number of years and was sort of a really big political figure. But we get his full story, which is starts with the story of Ciri's rebellion. And it's called Remembering Ciri, which is kind of an environmental tale. So on the planet of Maui Covenant, which has been sort of Polynesian, Hawaiian sort of cultures there are these floating islands that have these massive trees, which like have sails, and they're being towed by dolphins because the people that colonized this tried to sort of save the mammals from Earth's ocean. And it's kind of an ocean world, but the hegemony is starting to build a Farcaster portal on this planet. And in order to build it, they have to travel back and forth, getting the parts and bringing them to this system. And because of time dilation and whatnot, for every 7 months or so that it takes them to travel back and forth on the ship, something like 10 or 11 years take place in sort of real time. And so the people on this ship are working for like a year or two, but in reality, like 70 years is passing. So all the people on the ship are sort of consigned themselves to being cut off from all of their friends and family, but they'll get like really hefty pay from doing this. But there's this one guy, Marin Aspic, who he's just a kid. He's 19 years old. And they have sort of shore leave, and they're only allowed to go to this one barren rock island. They're not allowed to interact with the people of Maui Covenant because Maui Covenant's not part of the hegemony yet, and there's separatists that don't want them to be, and so they sort of fear this sort of colonization that could happen. But one of the other older shipmates has this magic carpet essentially, and he's like, hey, let's sneak off and sort of get some goyles. And so they fly off, and that's what they do. They land on the place, and they're having this sort of week-long celebration or multi-week celebration, and so it's a huge party, everyone's having fun, and so they meet with the locals and mingle. And this guy Marin, he bumps into this girl Siri, who is described time and again as being so utterly beautiful and just shy of 16, which is a weird way to say that she's a 15-year-old girl. But he sleeps with her, and they have this sort of fling for a few days, and it seems to be going great. And then he meets up with the other guy, and the other guy gets in a fight with a couple of locals and gets killed, gets murdered. And Marin gets taken up by the ship and is sort of punished, like, you weren't supposed to go out there, you really screwed things up, and now a guy's dead. But he's not punished, and he just continues working. So in the 7 months that it takes them to get back, 11 years have passed, and this sort of romance between him and this girl Siri on the planet has sort of become a thing, become sort of a worldwide phenomenon on Maui Covenant, to the point where even though he sort of broke the rules, the captain of the ship is like, hey Marin, like, for diplomatic reasons we need you to go down, you're kind of a bit of a celebrity now. And so thus starts what's called the reunions. So he has this reunion, he goes down and meets Siri, who's now 26 or 27, and they have a few weeks love affair, and he then leaves again. And this happens again and again and again. And she has children, and like when he goes back, he's still in his early 20s, and she's like middle-aged with children that are his children that are older than him. And it's this really interesting love story between people that are separated by time but remain faithful to each other and still in love. And even when she's like an elderly woman, he still loves her. And yeah, so it's really beautiful and all that. But the whole time we're getting glimpses of this final reunion. I think it's the 6th reunion, when he comes back to the planet when he's like, I don't know, mid to late 20s at this point, but she's dead. She has died, and he enters her tomb, and she's left a message for him along with a gun and stuff, sort of hinting that she wants him to destroy this Farcaster portal that they've been building for decades. And she reveals that once they build this, they will be overrun, and millions of tourists and colonists will come in and take over their world. And their world has tons of oil on it too. Like, it's not even like a subtle, like, oh, it's unobtainium. It's straight up, no, there's oil there, and then, yeah, sure, we don't use it for energy, but we still need oil, so we're gonna like tap the heck out of this planet. And so her sort of dying wish is, hey, can you please destroy the Farcaster portal? And he sort of smirks at that, and at that moment a bomb that he had placed in the Farcaster portal when he was building it goes off. So he was sort of anticipated her desire, and she didn't even have to ask. He fulfilled it. So the Farcaster portal gets blown up, that they took them decades to build, and this starts what is called Siri's rebellion. And so this Marin guy leads this rebellion against the hegemony. But of course, the hegemony is very quick. They bring in their military and shut the thing down, and eventually build the Farcaster portal anyways, and the planet is colonized, all the dolphins die off, and the sort of sailing islands are let loose and sort of die off. And at the end of the story, the Consul, who had been relating the tale, reveals that he is the grandson of Siri and Marin, and he had sort of seen the destruction of his home planet and become he uses the term a quisling. He joins up with the hegemony, becomes a hegemony politician, and convinces other worlds to join the hegemony, and sort of sees those worlds destroyed, does all these horrible things that will affect them, much like his own home planet. But he sort of gets his revenge in that he becomes a double agent / triple agent, working for both the hegemony and the ousters, but none. He had been a sort of a go-between between them for peace talks and whatnot, and the ousters reveal that they think that this time tombs thing on Hyperion have been created by them in the future, and they have this device that will shut off the entropic fields and sort of unleash the Shrike upon the planet. But they're like, we're going to set it up, but we're not going to actually trigger it, because like, who knows what could actually happen. It could destroy everything. And the Consul then kills them and activates it, knowingly letting the Shrike loose. So he's not really working for anyone. He's trying to bring down the hegemony. And after relating this tale, the rest of the pilgrims are like, you're a traitor to the hegemony, we should kill you. And then they realize this is this is pointless. We're all going to die anyways, heading to the Shrike. And yeah, so they all head off to the Shrike to singing The Wizard of Oz. And that's how it ends. It doesn't really resolve anything. The whole book is setting up, exploring the world, showing off the world, and setting up this story of the AIs in the Technocore and the Ousters in the Hegemony, and how somehow in the future the Shrike and the Time Tombs have been created to somehow either destroy humanity or destroy the Technocore, and so the Technocore wants to destroy humanity. And the whole book is just to set up this plot, which presumably, I think there's 3 other books in this series, presumably is then expanded upon and gotten into in the rest of the story. So this doesn't provide any answers really, but it is an amazing book to sort of not just see a world and incredible world building, but because of all the different Canterbury Tales-esque stories that are all so different. The cyberpunk noir detective thriller, the military GI space battle fighting dude, the ancient alien civilization with horror elements, the poet whose verse creates this monster. There's just so many different tales, and I really like it. It's really cool, and I do need to read the second one. So that was Dan Simmons's Hyperion.